Hi, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk on Racism. I'm Russ Terry, your host for today's episode. And we're here today with Alfred Ojukwu, the co-chair of BAM, Blacks at Microsoft, and also an accomplished motivational speaker and all-around great guy. Alfred, it's so excellent to have you here in studio.
Thank you, Russ. I'm super excited to be here with you. And, again, just always glad that we're able to connect and talk.
Yes, absolutely. I feel the same. So you work a day job at Microsoft, and like so many other people of color in the U.S., you have a night job, if you will, or another important role in the company with the organization's ERG, Employee Resource Group, BAM. What inspired you to be so involved?
Where do I start? I think there's just the importance of making sure we're connecting with our communities. And growing up, just understanding that there was a need to, explore just being who I am and understand what it is to be an African American in the U.S. So for me, getting involved was really just almost sort of second nature. It made sense.
And it's interesting that you say connecting with communities. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But first, I want to give you a shout out because it's a lot of work. And a lot of people of color have a hard enough day job, and then you have the added responsibilities, if you will, of being in an ERG, in addition to your busy day job at a very high profile, important company that's doing a lot of great work. Mm-hmm. So first, I want to give you a shout out for that.
No, I appreciate that. And I honestly, when I first came to Microsoft, it wasn't really dawning on me that I needed to get involved. I was an individual, I could make an impact. And so for the first 2 years, I kind of did my own thing, right? Because I'm good at what I do. What I realized was over time that I was experiencing some of the challenges that many people experience in the workforce, where they were perhaps looked at as being a little bit different than the rest of the folks. And my marks weren't where I expected them to be that first year. But what I learned was, one of my friends said, "Hey, why don't you come to this event, this evening?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not? Let's see what it's about." And what I learned going to that event is that I wasn't the only one. There were a number of other people going through the same challenges, in terms of promotions and, getting recognition for their work. And that's what motivated me to get involved, because I realized that we're stronger together.
I agree 100%, and I worked at PwC for 12 and a half years, and we saw many of the same things there. Our people of color had potential, but the marks, their ratings, weren't necessarily at the level of their potential yet. Mm-hmm. So one of my responsibilities I took on was, what can I do to help make sure we elevate these individuals so that they can tap into their potential? Mm-hmm. Getting them connected to different and more people, getting them the high profile, highly complex opportunities that will help them get the marks and ratings that they're capable of.
Agreed. And for me, the other side is realizing that you have to you have to get involved. You have to stay involved. You have to motivate other people to see the value of what they bring, because we all come into these companies. We don't know how important it is to connect with other folks. And once you learn that value, then all of a sudden what you see is, you start to learn the tips and tricks on how to be successful in the business, And that's what I found so amazing, right? I was involved with the local New York chapter. Currently, right now, I run Blacks at Microsoft worldwide. One of the co-chairs. And so I've gone from just working with the New York local area. Now I'm working with everyone from Texas to Costa Rica, even Ireland, helping them build communities in those local spaces as well, using the same methodology that we've done here in New York.
And, the connecting with others part is important, because I think sometimes, for those of us that are Gen X, I don't know your exact age, I'm going to guess, we're kind of just brought up to go into a job and work hard. Mm-hmm. And just the hard work will help us elevate. But then sometimes people that maybe have, a silver spoon in their mouth, or, white individuals who are more connected, white privilege, if you will, they have somebody they already know in the company who's pulling them up. So those of us who don't have to make sure that we are connecting with others. Right. So that people find out about us.
No, agreed. And it's not as difficult as it seems. It really means getting out of your comfort zone, understanding what's going on around you, understand who's working with you, and understand who needs that little bit of education of what's happening. I find myself, sharing the learnings with not just the Black community within Microsoft, but also the businesses. The businesses are starting to ask the question, what does it mean to have this sort of representation in the workspace? When we're going into the inner schools and education space, they want to see people that look like them. So those conversations are changing because now they're seeing, Black, successful, folks coming into their classrooms and say, wow, I see Alfred, I see Tom, I see, Sarah, they're doing great. And that also is a motivational aspect of the whole thing.
So I want to go to that now, because earlier you said connecting with communities, and a lot of times ERGs just focus on people of color internally and how to elevate them. But one of the things I love most about what Microsoft does, and you've already mentioned it a couple times, is connecting with communities and going into communities, going into high schools, and giving people role models that, I can be a Black person working in tech at a really amazing high-profile company. So kudos to you and your colleagues for everything that you're doing in those communities.
Thank you for that. And there's always a story behind all of that. So we also run what we call the Blacks at Microsoft Summer Mentorship Program each summer. We've been doing that for about 6 years now. The difference here is that when we first started, we thought, we're just going to get these kids in. And what we've learned is over the years, they've developed sort of this, self-confidence, understanding of how technology works, and pushing themselves to get to college. So we have over 800 applicants per year, and we end up selecting maybe 20 students. Funny thing happened. So a story, we brought in the kids from last year, and a young man came up to me. He goes, "Hey, Mr. Alfred, how are you doing?" And I kind of looked at him like, who are you? He goes, "I'm Daniel." Like, "Daniel who?" He goes, "I was in your class 6 years ago." I said, "That's great. How'd you find me?" He goes, "Well, I saw the Blacks at Microsoft sign. I just kept walking over to try to figure out what was going on." So that's good. "So how did you get in here?" He goes, "I work for Microsoft now." Blew my mind, right? So you never know who you're impacting in the community, in the local area. He was someone that probably was much shorter when I knew him, but now when I saw him, he was a full-grown, college and post-college student that now works at Microsoft. So that's the impact that you can have when you get involved with communities.
And number one, I got chills when you told me that story. That's so inspiring, and that's totally how it's supposed to work, where we find the untapped talent at the high school level, tell them about this opportunity, actually give them an opportunity, then they know more about what to do in college, places to go, things to major in, to put themselves in good position to get hired.
Yes.
And then 6 years later, he is an employee. I mean, that's exactly how it's supposed to work.
Yep, and it's just one of many. So that also gives me chills knowing that we're making that impact. And if it's just one student, that still matters.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's many more than just one.
Absolutely.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
So that's a great win. I like that. What are some of the other wins internally and or externally that you've gotten through BAM, Blacks at Microsoft?
No, great question as well. One thing that probably goes unnoticed is we had an opportunity to ring the NASDAQ bell. Now,
so cool.
It's cool. Since 2018, we connected with the NASDAQ team. And at that point, Blacks at Microsoft, we're 34 years old now. We're pretty old. ERG, next year will be 35. We're one of the first ERGs that showed up within the corporate spaces. And 5 years ago, 2018, we got a chance to ring the NASDAQ bell. They invited us mainly because they had not developed their Black ERG or their ERG within their program. So that first opportunity for us was really sort of monumental because we sat down, we spoke to them about what it means to have an ERG, and then they realized how amazing it was. We partnered with them in a few events, and then a year later they invited us back. Now they invited us back, and then they also shared with us that they actually started their own ERG called Globe. So the impact that you can make within a single company and that then gets accentuated within other companies is also just as powerful. So now Globe is 5 years in, and they're doing great. They've got a great network of folks within NASDAQ that talk about what they do, and we partner with them in a number of events.
Wow, and that's such a visionary thing that's happening, to go from idea to inspiration to implementation, it doesn't always happen that way. So, that sounds fantastic. Kudos to you and everybody involved, and to NASDAQ for putting their money where their mouth is and making it happen. Okay, I did the quick math here. 34 years ago, so that works out to late 80s is when Microsoft BAM started. I mean, I wasn't a professional yet, but when I was a professional in the 90s, I don't remember any ERGs at the places I worked. So Microsoft has been doing this for a minute, which is really impressive.
Yes, and the beauty of that is, 1989 to be exact. The beauty of that is it was just a couple of folks in the Seattle area that were looking for a place to get a haircut, and they were just talking like, we got to find a salon, and some of the ladies need to find a salon, and so that became that need for people to kind of aggregate and work together and understand each other. 34 years later, here we are, right? So we have 22 different chapters worldwide and growing. I just reached out to our team out in Germany, and we're going to be building the BAM Germany there as well. So it really is sort of a blessing in disguise. Now, the thing that happened with that as well is that once BAM ERG started up, it also started building up the other ERGs, the Hispanics, the Asians, the Gleam, and all the military. So we have about 9 ERGs now that are basically built off of the idea that there needed to be some sort of employee resource group space where people can connect with each other and talk about similar ideas and programs.
Yeah, and it helps with life stuff like where can I get a haircut that
Exactly.
is different than where the white people go to that knows how to cut my hair,
Exactly.
but also how can I progress within the company? So fantastic on all of that.
Thank you.
So why would you say is it harder for Black people in corporate America?
That's actually a really good question. And the truth is, it's a systemic challenge. It's something that is rooted in the core of our society, how things have developed over the years. And, in some ways, we think about progress and the struggle that we've had to take to get here. We think about all of the happenings that happened in the early 1960s and 70s with, Martin Luther King sort of asking for equal rights and civil rights and things of that nature, which then led to the idea of getting us into an opportunity where we can actually have positions. If in 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you're not going to see a whole lot of us within the corporate America. And so a lot of that has changed because we have continued to push forward, asking for that opportunity and breaking down the importance of representing what our society looks like. So I think the reason why it's been so difficult over time is because of just basic resistance and lack of understanding of the fact that we are a colorful people. We come from different backgrounds, we come from different ethnicities, locations, and we have yet to embrace that, specifically here in the U.S. And we see that globally, but if we talk about just the racism within America, our foundation started from a level of discriminatory practices, and we are constantly trying to break it, and by not necessarily forgetting what happened, but basically allowing people to acknowledge that these things happen, that we have to move on and build a new America, new space for people to be able to work together without having those differences.
And it's so terrible that basic resistance, as you said, has existed for so many years. Because I like to think I don't resist, but I recognize that many others do. And whenever I'm given a speaking gig on diversity, et cetera, I usually say resistance is down here. Obviously the worst, and then the next one up is tolerate, which is a little bit better. And then the next one up is accept. But then the ideal scenario is really to embrace, to seek out
Absolutely.
people of color and pull them up, pull them in, get their input. That's really what we're trying to, through this show, inspire people to do, to embrace, not resist, but not tolerate. And not even just accept, because accept is kind of passive. Oh, somebody's put in front of me, I'll talk to him or her or work with him or her.
Yeah.
But it's really that concept of embracing that, our goal is people watching this show, wherever you work, whatever you do, reaching out and embracing, not literally, but figuratively, pulling people up because, that's how we can reduce or hopefully at some point eliminate racism, not just in corporate America, but in society here in the U.S.
Yeah, and the truth is, racism isn't something you're born with. It's something you learn. Babies are born. They're not prone to look at someone and say, "Oh, you're black. Oh, you're less than, or you're more than." It's something that we learn within our societal environments, and in some ways we have to unlearn it. We have to realize that if we're ever going to get off this planet, the only way we're going to do it is by realizing that we're all made of the same stuff, right? Yeah. And that's the true fact. I do a session called Introspection into Colorism, or I Don't See Color, where it essentially presents content to the listener to ask them questions around, what are the things that they see in the imagery that are sort of predispositions, ideas, and forces them to sort of ask. When a good question that came up in one of those questions is, when did you realize that you were white or not white, right? And so when you start thinking back to when did you start categorizing yourself as being one or the other, and that's when the concept of essentially, does racism exist, essentially, evaded our minds, and we just held on to it.
Gosh, I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah.
And when you do is maybe when you realize that, okay, black people are being treated differently than white people, and vice versa. And so once you go back and sort of try to understand how you got to that point, then that's when you can unlearn the learning that was programmed within you a long time ago.
And I probably didn't realize it until my mid-30s. I was working as an HR manager, and a small percentage of my job was diversity. And I saw, the ratings, the results, if you will. So the ratings, could see that people of color were being treated differently. I looked at the volume of people, it was a very low percentage of our, huge department.
Yeah.
So it was at that point, 35 years in, that I realized it, and only because it was part of my job to realize it. So how many other white individuals out there, may still not realize it,
or be influenced by what's going on around them that they've been told, they've dealt with. I've been in situations where you might go to a city like Danbury, and I'm from Connecticut, where they don't have a whole lot of diversity there, and then maybe they see you, they'll look at you and say, "Oh, wow, there's another black man here." But it's a learned experience, and we're trying to get to the point where people see it as part of our society.
And I have one corporate client I've worked with. It's a company out in the Midwest, if you will, in a flyover state, and an amazing black man is the general manager, if you will, at that location. So the leader of the 300-person subsidiary of an international company. And he said in our diversity events there that he goes to Walmart and is in self-checkout, and people are coming to make sure he's not stealing things, which is crazy, and those of us who are white don't realize in many instances that people of color are experiencing that because, we don't experience that, and it's crazy that stuff like that's happening. He doesn't need to shoplift a can of soup at Walmart because, he makes a very nice salary, but the fact that he has to endure that is terrible.
The worst part about that is there's people that know that it's happening, and then there's people that don't. They don't even realize it's happening. And even my story, I go back to when I went to school in Missouri, and I would be driving back from Columbia to Jeff City. I can't tell you how many times I got pulled over, right? For whatever reason, and it kind of reminds me of that idea that, profiling is real. It's real.
And I have a black friend that got pulled over while after we were out one night. Luckily he hadn't been drinking. Luckily there was no incident, but I had been pulled over a number of times, and the way that the police treated him was different than the way that police treated me.
Yes.
which is a shame, and we could talk about police probably for an entire separate episode. Maybe we'll have you back.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the work in Germany through BAM. So how many hours a week would you say you work in your day job, and how many hours a week do you work on BAM stuff on average?
I balance it out.
Okay.
And I'll say that the way I can explain that is it's more of a labor of love, right? Sometimes you put in the work because you know it makes an impact to the people around you. There are times where, my work, I drive surface devices, but I tend to have my calls during the day, and in the evenings I may have calls with my colleagues or planning discussion calls in the evening. So I kind of work around it and blend it into my day as necessary.
Shout out to Surface. I love the commercials, especially the woman who's a San Francisco Giants or San Francisco 49ers coach. That commercial, yeah, that's right, great. Okay, but again, shout out to you for working nights, basically, for this passion, BAM. Again, I know I gave you a shout out already, but giving you another. What is an example of racism that you personally have experienced, either professionally, at a prior company, in your personal life, at work, etc.?
That's actually a good question. What is an example? For me, I've done I'll answer it in two ways, but I'll see if I can answer it the way. I've done my best to do what I can to eliminate it from my purview. Not that it doesn't exist, but the more we give energy to it, the more power we give it. When we talk about identifying how to manage the idea of racism within an organization, if you continue to acknowledge it, they'll use it against you. So what I've done essentially is to identify ways to make sure people see me for who I am, and essentially step myself up. The challenges as a black man in corporate America, you tend to have to do more than the average, white man to get yourself to where you need to. So I work twice as hard, but I'm also doing all of my BAM work. But I have to be, you're either, and it's this term, you're either a superstar or you maybe don't know what you're doing. There's no in between. You can't be average. You've got to be way up here, or you've got to be, he doesn't know what he's doing. So for me, I've had a number of experiences. I probably can't sit here and talk about each and every one of them. The one that probably stands out the most is I had a mentor, and years back when I first came to Microsoft, and I was one of those people. I am one of those people that I speak up. I'm very boisterous. I get excited. I even have some. I usually say what I want to say, vocally, even with customers, and mostly early on in my career. The mentor gave feedback to my manager that he wasn't cut for the job, right?
Wow.
Because of my personality, because of my energy. And so the manager basically looked and decided, okay, my ratings for the first year wasn't going to be where it needed to be, right? If on a scale of 1 to 10, you're a 2. And you're sitting here talking to me, and you know how much energy I have, what I bring, and so I paused for a second because I looked at all my other colleagues, and I'm putting in 3-4 hours more work in terms of making an impact to the business, but they're not doing half of what I'm doing. And so I had to pause for a second and say, you don't know me. So I sat down and I had to take actions, and I sat down with my manager at the time, and I said, what is it that I need to do to show you that I can make an impact? I think once I did that and we spoke through the details and I told them sort of my story, the next year, I think I was probably at the top of the ladder in terms of, this guy's making a difference, and it's been that way ever since. But it's the realization that people are going to misjudge you, based on your culture, your approach, your style of communication, because that's what we do.
The bias, whether it was unconscious or conscious, or a combination of both on the part of that mentor.
Yes.
And sorry to hear that you had to go through that. it sounds like, my words, you were treated unfairly, and
It made me a stronger person.
it does, and you are a strong person for sharing the story with a smile on your face. I think in life, when we're treated unfairly, whether racism or something else, it can make many of us angry.
Yes.
And so many of the guests who've sat in that seat, as we're now in season 2, have told these stories with a smile on their face, despite it being, it sounds like an unpleasant and painful and upsetting and frustrating thing to go through.
Yeah, I mean, you come to life to have lessons. I mean, that's my personal experience, and in some ways, it would be boring if I didn't learn it. Now, I'm not saying I want to have that experience again, but you're stronger for it, and educating those around you, just like we're doing here, educating folks, is what gets me excited, because it helps us be a better society, and if it helps one person, then I'm happy.
Well, you're a big person for the grace that you have navigated this stuff with.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things I'm passionate about is name pronunciation. And, I don't say it in a joking way, but a lot of times what I've observed is people of color, especially if they have a unique name like you do, Alfred Ojukwu, may get your name mispronounced. People may not try to pronounce your name. People may purposely mispronounce it. And I've seen that, out in the world as I've navigated the world. Mm-hmm. So, which I look at as a microaggression, if you will. Is that something that you have experienced?
Not so much so. I think wouldn't call it so much of a microaggression as more of a curiosity, where people don't know where it comes from, and they will ask, "Well, where's your name from?" My father was Nigerian. My parents are Nigerian, so I'm first generation U.S. And so I tell them, I come from a Nigerian background, right? That's who I am. But I grew up in the African American culture. I know the environment. I know the Nigerian culture. I know the African American culture. But the name itself, Ojukwu, has meaning. A lot of our names have meaning, especially if you're from the African continent. In my name, it means he who has power, he who owns the power, is the name. And in some ways, that's kind of shaped my life. My dad was a very boisterous man, and he was involved in a lot of political discussions, both in Nigeria and also here in the U.S. And I took on after that, because I understood how important it was to speak up. So I guess it kind of matches the name.
Well, I love it. Alfred Ojukwu, he who has power, powerful, amazing wisdom. We're so grateful to you for being here at Real Talk on Racism today, for all the work you do at Blacks at Microsoft, and out there in the world. I'm grateful to know you, and thanks again for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure. And thank you, all of you, for watching. We're grateful to you for the support. Appreciate you watching Real Talk on Racism, and we'll see you again next time.